When people think of serial killers, the same names come to mind: Dahmer, Bundy, Gacy, but none of them even come close to the 5 monsters on this list. Their victim counts set records so high, stretching far beyond what most people even think is possible, and yet, most have never even heard their names.
From the jungles of South America to quiet city streets in Eastern Europe, these 5 men left trails of terror so brutal, they rewrote the very definition of evil.
Mikhail Popkov was born on March 7, 1964, in Norilsk, Siberia. He joined the police force and eventually settled in Angarsk, a quiet industrial town in Irkutsk Oblast.
But beneath the surface, Papkov harbored deep resentment. He believed many women were immoral. He claimed his rage was sparked when he suspected his wife was cheating. That suspicion became obsession, and that obsession turned deadly.
Popkov's method was chilling in its simplicity. He used his police car and uniform to lure women late at night, offering rides to those walking alone, often after parties or bars. Once they were inside the car, he drove them into forest or deserted areas on the outskirts of town.
There, he attacked with horrifying violence: axes, screwdrivers, knives. He raped many of his victims before killing them, mutilating their bodies with rage that defied logic. Some were so badly disfigured, investigators couldn't identify them.
His earliest known victim was a 17-year-old girl murdered in 1992. But he didn't stop. Papkov killed women of all ages: students, mothers, sex workers, and even a schoolteacher. Some bodies were dumped in the woods, others near train tracks or industrial zones.
As the years passed, rumors of a serial killer spread through Angarsk. Between 1994 and 2000, over 30 women were found dead in similar circumstances, but no arrests were made. The killer seemed invisible, and no one suspected a cop.
Papkov even participated in some of the investigations. He helped with crime scene security, he attended funerals, and at one point, he even transported the body of one of his victims back to her family.
But then, he suddenly stopped. Between 2000 and 2010, there was silence. No known killings. Some investigators thought the killer had died, been arrested, or left the region. But Papkov had just taken a break.
In that decade, he retired from the police force and became a security guard and lived a quiet life. He went camping with his family, he took photos, and smiled in front of lakes and forests. The same forests where he had buried his victims.
In 2012, Russian authorities launched a massive cold case operation. They took DNA samples from over 3,000 men who had worked in law enforcement. When Papkov's sample came in, everything changed.
His DNA matched multiple murder scenes. Fibers from his car matched crime scene evidence, shoe prints, and tire treads. The evidence closed in fast. He was arrested in June 2012 while at work. He didn't resist.
During interrogation, Papkov didn't deny it. In fact, he began to confess, one after another. He gave names, dates, and locations. In his words, he was cleansing the streets of women he believed were impure. It wasn't justice. It was hatred disguised as purpose.
In 2015, he was convicted of 22 murders and sentenced to life in prison. But he wasn't done talking. Over the next 3 years, he confessed to 56 more killings. His second trial in 2018 added those charges, and again he was sentenced to life.
That brought his official victim count to 78. But in interviews with Russian media, Papkov claimed he'd killed at least 83. Some detectives still suspect it's closer to 200. Not all remains have been found. Some victims were never reported missing.
Javed Iqbal Mughal was born in Lahore, Pakistan in 1956. His father was a successful businessman and Iqbal lived a comfortable life, but his behavior was never quite normal. From a young age, he was reclusive, controlling, and unusually secretive. He lived in a large house with several teenage boys who he claimed to be students under his care. Authorities saw him as eccentric, but no one looked too closely.
He opened a video game arcade and later ran a factory that supposedly helped street children. But behind closed doors, he preyed on the very boys he claimed to protect: runaways, orphans, and the homeless. Kids no one would come looking for.
On December 30th, 1999, editors at the Daily Jang, a Pakistani newspaper, received a letter from Iqbal. It read like a manifesto. He claimed to have killed 100 boys, all between the ages of 6 and 16 over the past year. He described luring them in, sometimes offering them food or shelter. And once inside his house, he would drug them and strangle them with a piece of cloth.
Afterward, he dismembered their bodies. He dissolved the flesh in barrels of hydrochloric acid and flushed the remains into a nearby drain. The bones were buried in his backyard. To prove it wasn't a hoax, Iqbal included photos of his victims and listed their names in chilling detail.
Police raided his home that same day. What they found matched the letter exactly. 2 vats filled with acid, human remains floating inside, bags of children's clothing, and a blood-stained floor. On the wall, he scrawled in Urdu, "This is my punishment."
But why murder 100 children? Iqbal explained in the letter that his actions were revenge. He claimed that years earlier, he had been raped by a group of young boys, and the police had refused to help him. That event, he said, triggered something in him. He made the vow to kill exactly 100 boys to punish society.
He also wrote that the government didn't care about these kids. In his eyes, no one would miss them. Many of his victims had no parents, no records, and no one would report them missing. And that was exactly what made him his targets.
Even more horrifying, he didn't act alone. Police arrested several of his teenage accomplices, boys he manipulated into helping him dispose of the bodies. Some claimed they were threatened. Others had been abused by Iqbal for years.
After sending the confession, Iqbal vanished. For 3 weeks, Pakistan was in a panic. Every major city was on lockdown. His face was on every news broadcast, every newspaper, and every street corner. The government labeled it as the biggest manhunt in the country's history.
On January 30, 2000, Iqbal turned himself in at the office of the Daily Jang, the same paper that received his letter. Calmly, he told reporters, "I'm Javed Iqbal. I surrender." He insisted he wasn't afraid of death. He had wanted to be caught.
Iqbal's trial began in March 2000 and drew massive public attention. He was found guilty of 100 murders, and the judge passed a sentence that mirrored Iqbal's own methods. You will be strangled to death in front of the parents of your victims, and your body will be cut into 100 pieces and dissolved in acid.
But Pakistan's legal system wouldn't allow such a punishment. The ruling was symbolic, meant to match the scale of his crimes. Iqbal was placed in Katlakpad jail alongside his youngest accomplice Sajid, a teenage boy who helped lure victims.
On October 8, 2001, just a year after the trial, Javed Iqbal was found dead in his prison cell, hanging from the bars. Beside him, Sajid was also dead. Officials ruled it a suicide, but many didn't buy it.
There were no suicide notes. The position of the bodies raised questions. Some guards claimed they had heard shouting that night. Others believed Iqbal had been murdered, either by guards seeking revenge or by fellow inmates.
Whatever the truth is, Iqbal never faced full justice. He never served his time, and never endured the sentence the court had tried to pass. He died with 100 confirmed victims under his name, and possibly more.
After his death, investigators found a hidden notebook with photographs of victims not on his original list. Some believe he may have killed over 100 children.
A man who admitted to murdering over 300 young girls across 3 countries, known as the Monster of the Andes, Pedro López's crimes spanned the whole continent. And for decades, he vanished into the chaos of South America's forgotten roads, taking lives in silence.
Pedro Alonso Lopez was born on October 8, 1948, in Santa Isabel, Colombia. He was the 7th of 13 children. His mother was a prostitute, and his father was killed before Lopez was born. He endured brutal physical and sexual abuse in childhood. At just 8 years old, he ran away from home and lived on the streets of Bogota.
Lopez survived by stealing and begging. He was taken in by a man who offered him shelter, only to be repeatedly raped and beaten. That trauma rooted itself deep. As he grew older, Lopez became fixated on revenge against those who he saw as weak and vulnerable, especially young girls.
In the 1970s, Lopez moved through Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. He targeted girls between the ages of 8 and 12. He would approach them in crowded markets or outside schools, lure them away with gifts or lies, and then disappear into the countryside.
His method was cold and calculated. He'd rape and strangle his victims, sometimes burying them in shallow graves. According to his later confessions, he often returned to the bodies and spoke to them, believing they were still with him.
In Peru, Lopez was caught by a tribal community while trying to abduct a girl. They planned to execute him, but an American missionary convinced them to turn him over to police. Instead of prison, he was deported to Colombia. No charges were filed.
In 1980, Ecuadorian police found a mass grave containing remains of 4 young girls. Lopez was arrested in Ambato after trying to abduct another child. While in custody, a flash flood uncovered more bodies, leading police to interrogate Lopez more aggressively.
Eventually, he confessed to killing more than 110 girls in Ecuador, 100 in Colombia, and another 100 in Peru. Authorities were skeptical until he led them to more graves. His confessions were horrifyingly accurate.
Despite admitting to over 300 murders, Lopez was convicted in Ecuador of only 110 and sentenced to 16 years, the maximum penalty at the time. He served just 14 before being released in 1994 for good behavior.
He was deported to Colombia and briefly committed to a psychiatric hospital. In 1998, he was declared sane and released again. Since then, his whereabouts have been unknown. Some believe he may have returned to killing, others think he might have died.
He didn't hunt in the dark. He didn't use a gun or a knife. He used candy, coins and toys, a pair of fake glasses, and a smile. Luis Garavito walked from town to town in Colombia, dressed like a priest or a teacher. But wherever he went, children disappeared and were never seen alive again.
Garavito admitted to killing 138 boys, and investigators believe the number could be over 300. The world called him La Bestia, the Beast, and no name has ever fit more perfectly.
In 1997, police in Pereira, Colombia, found the mutilated body of a young boy in a sugarcane field. His wrists were bound, his throat had been slit, and he had been assaulted, tortured, and left in a shallow grave. The remains of 2 other boys were found nearby, buried the same way.
Over the next few months, more remains surfaced across Gvido, Risaralda, and Valle del Cauca. All were boys, all showed signs of brutal torture. Police were stunned by the cruelty and the growing body count. Someone was targeting street kids and runaways.
Luis Garavito was born in 1957 in Genova, Colombia. He grew up in a home filled with violence. His father beat him with belts, sticks, and machetes. Garavito later claimed that he was sexually abused as a child, first by a neighbor and then by his father.
By his 20s, he began drifting across Colombia. He never held a steady job. Instead, he sold religious trinkets and posed as missionaries, school officials, or homeless men. He changed his appearance constantly, glasses, wigs, and different clothes, to lure boys aged 6 to 16.
He picked boys who were poor, alone, and often orphans or homeless. He would offer them food, money, or a promise of work. And then he'd lead them into the woods, far from help, and what happened next was too horrific for the news to print in full.
Garavito's victims weren't just murdered, they were tortured. He tied them up, often with their own shoelaces. He would blindfold them, cut them and assault them, then kill them, usually by slashing the throat or stabbing the heart.
Most of his victims were found with bite marks, burns, and broken bones. Some had even been decapitated. Others had carvings on their bodies. Each crime scene was methodical, precise, and ritualistic.
In late 1998, a mass grave near the town of Palermo revealed 13 young victims. But this time, investigators found something unusual: a pair of broken glasses and an empty bottle of lubricant.
Nearby, a witness had seen a man fitting Garavito's description walking with one of the boys. Using DNA evidence from a cigarette butt and the glasses, police traced the suspect to a man already in jail for attempted rape of a child. His name? Luis Alfredo Garavito Cubillos.
Once in custody, Garavito crumbled. Over the next few months, he confessed to 138 murders in graphic detail, times, places, and victims' names. He drew maps, marked locations, and led police to grave sites no one knew existed.
But investigators believe the real number is far higher. Diaries found in his belongings contain names and drawings. Police believe he may have killed over 300 boys across 11 Colombian states, and possibly in Ecuador and Venezuela.
Garavito was convicted in 2001. He received a sentence of 1,853 years in prison, the longest sentence in Colombian history. But there was a catch. Colombia's maximum prison term is 40 years, reduced to 22 for good behavior.
The public response was explosive. Colombian citizens were horrified. Protests broke out. People demanded justice, and the government scrambled to change the law. Eventually, legislation was introduced to ensure Garavito would never walk free again.
He was denied parole in 2021, after a psychological evaluation found he still posed a danger. The same year, Luis Garavito was diagnosed with leukemia. In October 2023, he died in a prison hospital, alone, weak and forgotten.
He wore a white coat, smiled politely, and made house calls. Harold Shipman wasn't just a killer, he was a trusted doctor. And over the course of decades, in quiet homes and clean clinics, he killed more people than any known serial killer in modern history.
On June 24, 1998, in the small town of Hyde, England, 81-year-old Kathleen Grundy was found dead in her home. Her daughter, who was a lawyer, was confused. Her mother had been active, healthy, and perfectly lucid. But Dr. Harold Shipman had already signed a death certificate, listing old age as the cause.
That alone might not have raised suspicion, but Grundy's daughter found something else, a will. It appeared out of nowhere and left her mother's entire estate, over £386,000, to Dr. Harold Shipman. That discovery would crack open the walls of a case far more horrifying than anyone ever expected.
Police exhumed Kathleen Grundy's body in August 1998. Autopsy results showed high levels of diamorphine, a strong opioid usually reserved for terminal cancer patients. It hadn't been prescribed to her. Her doctor, Shipman, had lied.
And she wasn't alone. Investigators began digging through his past. They discovered an alarming pattern. Hundreds of his elderly patients had died suddenly. Most were alone when they died. Most were cremated, and nearly all had been seen by Shipman shortly before their death.
Born in Nottingham in 1946, Harold Shipman was always an overachiever. He went to medical school at the University of Leeds and qualified as a doctor in 1970. But even early on, he was hiding something. In 1975, just 5 years into his career, he was caught forging prescriptions for pethidine, a powerful painkiller he was addicted to.
He was fined, went to rehab, and quietly resumed his career. No license suspension and no criminal record. And from there, he kept going, practicing in West Yorkshire and then moving to Hyde. People called him kind, attentive, a man who took time with his patients. No one ever suspected what he was really doing.
Shipman's killings weren't sloppy. They were methodical. He often chose elderly women, patients he had known for years. He'd visit them at home or call them into the clinic. Then, he'd administer a lethal dose of diamorphine, knowing it would kill quickly and quietly.
When the patient died, he'd tell the family it was natural causes. He'd signed a death certificate himself. In most cases, there was no autopsy and no investigation. It was all clean, routine, and medical. He even encouraged cremation, destroying the last remaining evidence.
During his 2000 trial, Shipman was convicted of 15 murders, all women aged 49 to 81. But that was just the beginning. A full inquiry followed, led by Judge Janet Smith. After years of investigation, the final report concluded that Harold Shipman murdered at least 215 people.
Some estimates suggest that the real number is over 250. Most were elderly women and some were men. Some victims were in perfect health, and others were terminally ill. His youngest known victim was just 41 years old.
Even more terrifying, he didn't do it for money. Unlike many killers, Shipman had no clear financial motive. The Grundy will turned out to be a rare exception. Most of the time, he killed for control. He decided when life ended, that power became his obsession.
At trial, Shipman never showed remorse. He denied everything. He sat in silence and refused to explain his actions. The jury didn't buy it. On January 31st, 2000, he was sentenced to 15 life terms, one for each murder.
But there would be no closure. On January 13, 2004, just a day before his 58th birthday, Shipman was found hanging in his prison cell at Wakefield Prison. He had used bedsheets to kill himself. He left no note, no apology, and no explanation.
And if you like insane crime stories like this, check out the playlist on your screen now. And don't forget to subscribe.